In the shadows between history's official lines, there are places where truth was buried alive. Under ice, beneath oceans, inside vaults no map will name. These are not forgotten stories. They were silenced, strangled in their infancy, sealed behind paper marked for authorized eyes only. We stand at the edge of those sealed doors now, hearing the whispers from the other side, and deciding whether we dare to open them. On the morning of April 12, 1945, a Luftwaffe signals unit in Blankenburg, Germany, received a high-priority encrypted field transmission from SS Obersturmbannführer Kurt Weidemann. The message, routed through a mobile radio truck under call, signed Bergwolf, ordered immediate clearance of the main road between Wernigerode and the Harz Highlands for a convoy of 12 Opel Blitz and Bussing Nag trucks. Each was heavily tarped, guarded by Waffen-SS troops in full combat gear, their collar patches bearing the emblem of the SS Wirtschaftsverwaltungshauptamt, unusual for a frontline retreat. The operation was designated Eisenfall in the orders, marked Geheime Reichssache, and authorized under Himmler's direct seal. Surviving German logistical records, later seized by the US Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, list no official cargo description, only Versandgruppe A3 Rot. By this point in the war, the Harz Mountains were a labyrinth of collapsing defensive positions, scattered Volkssturm militia, and retreating Wehrmacht units. Allied forces were closing in from the west and south. Soviet spearheads were pushing from the east. Yet Eisenfall's convoy route made no tactical sense. It moved toward encirclement, deeper into terrain riddled with abandoned mine shafts and railway tunnels. At 11:45 hours, Allied reconnaissance aircraft from the 9th Tactical Air Command spotted the convoy from 7,000 feet. Declassified after 1989, one set of grainy photographs shows elongated, cylindrical shapes beneath the truck tarps, some with visible tail fins protruding, objects inconsistent with artillery or fuel tanks. These images were attached to US Army Air Force's Intelligence Memo, AAF G2 Field Doc 4381, later withdrawn from circulation and filed under Red Border Technical Intelligence. Local accounts gathered by CIC field teams in May 1945 tell of the convoy halting near the Ruberland limestone caves. A farmer, Heinrich Kruger, claimed he heard machinery running all night inside the cavern system, followed by a series of concussive blasts in the early hours. When US forces reached the site in June, they found the caves sealed by rockfalls, the air thick with a burnt metallic stench. No remains, vehicles or cargo were recovered. British military intelligence, Section 5, speculated in a June 20th field report, MI5 RefMWHX 12-27B keys, that Eisenfall's cargo may have been linked to the America Bomber Project, specifically the Messerschmitt Me 264 and the Junkers Ju 390 long-range prototypes, both theoretically capable of striking the US East Coast. Allied engineers in 1944 had intercepted partial turbine assembly drawings for a jet-assisted transatlantic platform, but the designs were incomplete. Section 5's analysts noted that the Harz was already known to house aircraft development facilities, including subterranean assembly halls for the Heinkel He-162 and V-2 components. An internal US Army Ordnance Bulletin from August 1945, stamped "Restricted," warned that several specialized engineers from Dessau's Junkers plant were unaccounted for. Engineers who had been reassigned to an undisclosed SS project in early March. Cross-referencing POW interrogations reveals mention of an oxygen plant hidden in the mountains, producing liquid oxidizers in large quantities. One detainee, Untersturmführer Hans Klett, claimed the trucks in Eisenfall were carrying sections of a breathing lung for a flying machine that would never return. His statement was officially recorded, then marked as psychiatric, in the file margin. In 1946, a joint Anglo-American technical recovery team attempted to access the sealed Ruberland site. The mission, logged as T-Force Harz Recovery Operation No. 19th, ended after geologists determined that blasting through the cave mouth, risked triggering an uncontrolled collapse. All further excavation plans were shelved. By 1948, Soviet occupation forces controlled the area, sealing it permanently. For decades, Eisenfall remained a minor footnote in archival indexes, mentioned only in cross-references to late-war SS industrial movements. But in 1972, a Freedom of Information request by an aviation historian revealed the existence of a single preserved reconnaissance negative from April 12, 1945, the only surviving US image of the convoy. The negative was heavily degraded, but enhancement attempts revealed distinct structural features on the cargo: fin assemblies and cylindrical bodies, each approximately 8 meters in length. German post-war witnesses have since recanted, denied, or corrected their testimonies, often after unexplained visits by officials from the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz. One exception was Elsa Baumann, then a teenage nurse in Wernigerode, who in a 1983 interview claimed she saw SS troops loading large metallic rings, each stamped with Reichsadler insignia and technical numbers, beginning with J390, onto one of the trucks. Days later, she said, all personnel from the town's rail depot vanished without explanation. Modern analysis of Eisenfall's surviving fragments suggests that if the convoy carried intact propulsion assemblies for a long-range bomber, they were never recovered by Allied forces. Their fate remains officially unknown. The Haas Caves, now off-limits under environmental protection orders, have not been re-examined since the 1940s. The last paper trail entry appears in a US Army Technical Intelligence Division memo, dated November 3, 1945, authored by Colonel A.J. Fielder. It reads in part, "No physical recovery from Eisenfall site. Recommend closure of subject file under Directive 14B. Public explanation, destruction of aircraft parts by retreating enemy. No further field resources to be allocated." After that, Eisenfall disappears into silence, buried beneath rock, bureaucracy, and the shifting front lines of a war already ended. On the night of February 9, 1962, at 02:14 hours, NATO listening station Delta 12, located near Bad Aibling, West Germany, intercepted a short burst transmission, unlike anything its operators had heard in nearly 2 decades. The burst, lasting 1.8 seconds, was sent on 4.7765 MHz using an archaic Wehrmacht Enigma cipher pattern. One retired by 1944. The message, once decrypted, read only, Projekt Morgenlicht operational. Delta 12's cryptography logbook recorded the signal's point of origin as 66 degraufi N, 14 degram 15A, coordinates placing it inside the Svartisen Glacier, deep in Norway's Arctic Circle. Initial suspicion among the station's analysts was Soviet deception, but the choice of obsolete cipher and the lack of corresponding Soviet call patterns triggered immediate escalation. By 04 Zau, the intercept had been routed to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in Casteau, Belgium. The British Signals branch at GCHQ, reviewing wartime archives, located a thin, dust-covered folder marked Morgenlicht, Kriegsmarine, Geheim. Its contents consisted of a single, unsigned memorandum dated January 14, 1945, referencing operation to be secured in northern ice fields, and special cargo beyond classification, delivery to Arctic Station Theta 9. No maps, no diagrams, only a note in the margin. Requires level Schwartz clearance. Norway's post-war records revealed nothing resembling a Theta 9, but oral history collected from coastal fishing communities told of late-war German U-boats surfacing near glacial fjords to unload heavy crates into sled convoys guarded by men in white camouflage smocks. A 1951 Norwegian police report describes hikers encountering sealed steel doors in a crevasse above Hollandsfjorden, doors that vanished under ice by the following winter. Within weeks of the 1962 transmission, SHAPE authorized a joint covert assessment codenamed White Veil, comprising Norwegian Special Forces, British Royal Marines, and 2 American Navy underwater demolition teams, the unit deployed to Svartisson in late March under the cover of a meteorological research expedition. Their objective: locate the origin point of the 1962 signal and assess for possible Soviet presence. The initial reconnaissance documented fresh ice fissures in an area previously mapped in 1957. Embedded in one fissure wall, divers found a rusted steel hatch, partially crushed by glacial pressure, bearing faint Kriegsmarine markings and the number Theta 9. The hatch was impassable without heavy cutting equipment, which could not be deployed in the unstable ice conditions. A decision was made to drill a narrow entry shaft from above. White Whale's debriefs, preserved in partially redacted Norwegian Defence Archives files, note that on April 5, 1962, 3 divers, Petty Officer Thomas Reeves, USN, Corporal Jan Henriksen, Norwegian Army, and Lance Corporal Peter Mills, Royal Marines, entered the shaft at 07:42 hours. By 09:10, radio contact became erratic, punctuated by bursts of static. Their last intelligible message, "It's intact. Christ, it's all," followed by an abrupt cut-off. A backup team entered at 09:45, but the shaft had collapsed under shifting ice. Drilling ceased after seismic instruments detected further instability. None of the 3 men were recovered. Official cause of death: glacial collapse during reconnaissance. White Whale was terminated within 48 hours, and surviving members signed lifelong secrecy agreements. In 1979, a retired GCHQ analyst, Malcolm Spears, claimed in a private letter to a historian that he had seen a classified photograph taken from the diver's helmet camera before signal loss. It allegedly showed a frost-covered chamber lined with cylindrical tanks, each painted with the Reichsadler and stenciled with the word Atemlicht. Spears wrote that he believed the tanks were part of an oxygen generation, or cryogenic storage, system decades ahead of its time. Speculation persists among military historians that Projekt Morgenlicht was either an experimental power source for extended U-boat operations under Arctic ice, or a weapons storage facility for advanced munitions, possibly chemical or biological. Yet no surviving Allied document describes its purpose in detail. The last mention of Morgenlicht in NATO archives appears in a 1963 technical assessment concluding, potentially hazardous contents, access inadvisable due to environmental instability and unknown secondary security measures. Svartisson's ice has advanced significantly since the 1960s, burying any trace of Theta 9. Norwegian government advisories list the area as prone to dangerous crevassing and restrict civilian access under environmental preservation laws. Privately, former White Whale participants have told researchers of echoes heard beneath the glacier, low-frequency pulses that seemed too regular to be natural. In 2004, a routine satellite radar survey by the European Space Agency detected an anomalous metallic reflection beneath the glacier at a depth consistent with the 1962 coordinates. The finding was classified within 48 hours, and subsequent public data releases omitted the relevant scan sectors. No further expeditions have been authorized. Projekt Morgenlicht remains one of the few documented Cold War-era instances where a dormant Nazi signal reactivated decades after the war's end, and where the operation to investigate it ended with men vanishing into the ice, their mission erased from public record, their fate sealed beneath a moving wall of frozen silence. At 15:23 hours on July 28, 1945, the crew of a B-29 Superfortress from the 20th Air Force's 45th Reconnaissance Squadron, flying a photographic survey over southern Manchuria, recorded an unusual movement along a rail spur near the town of Hailar. The sequence of images, declassified in 1977, shows a column of Japanese Type 94 locomotives hauling flat cars loaded with massive cylindrical containers, each secured under canvas, with the outlines of segmented plating visible. On the lead flat car, 2 figures in peaked caps are clearly identifiable as German officers, based on uniform cut and insignia. In the weeks before Japan's surrender, Manchuria was a chaotic convergence of collapsing Kwantung Army defenses, advancing Soviet mechanized units, and desperate Japanese evacuations of material. The American crew, expecting only light rail traffic, was startled to see a heavily guarded train moving west toward the Mongolian border, away from both the Soviet front and Japanese port facilities. The reconnaissance log entry for that day was flagged with the identifier Asset 91L and forwarded to the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, in Washington. The file was classified operationally inadmissible within a week, its imagery withdrawn from general intelligence circulation. A handwritten note on the cover sheet, initialed RMC, reads, "Axis transfer, sensitive. Do not pursue via standard channels. Post-war Japanese records, fragmentary and heavily sanitized, make no mention of such a convoy." However, Soviet archive releases in the 1990s revealed that on August 10, 1945, 2 days after the USSR entered the Pacific War, Red Army troops encountered heavy resistance along that same rail corridor from a mixed detachment of Japanese and foreign personnel. A Soviet after-action report lists non-Asian combatants among the dead equipped with MP-40 submachine guns and MG-42s. Standard German issue. Prisoner interrogations conducted by the Soviet 25th Army's Smersh counterintelligence unit describe the cargo as chemical rain cylinders, a phrase later connected by Allied analysts to the codename Projekt Silberregen, Silver Rain. Allied wartime intercepts from 1944 referenced Silberregen as a joint Axis development in special munitions capable of delivering persistent atmospheric agents. Technical details remain scarce, but an unconfirmed OSS memorandum from April 1945 describes a metallic aerosol dispersal device under cooperative study by Japanese Unit 731 and German military chemists evacuated from Peenemünde in late 1944. In 1978, during construction near the disused Hylar rail spur, local workers unearthed a shallow grave containing the remains of 16 Soviet soldiers, all wearing remnants of 1945-era uniforms. The Soviet Ministry of Defense dispatched a forensic team, whose public report claimed the soldiers died from combat trauma. However, 2 independent pathologists who briefly examined photographs of the remains noted extensive irregular burn patterns on bone surfaces, damage inconsistent with gunfire, explosives, or known incendiary devices. The surviving B-29 reconnaissance negatives show that the train entered a tunnel system cut into a ridgeline west of Hylar at approximately 15:47 hours. No subsequent images show its emergence on the other side. US Army Map Service surveys conducted in 1946 list the tunnel as collapsed, non-navigable. The cause of the collapse is undocumented, though a partially redacted Soviet engineering report from 1946 mentions catastrophic subsidence after internal detonation of unknown composition. A former OSS archivist, speaking anonymously, in 1985 claimed that the Silberregen project was deliberately buried within the post-war chaos of competing Allied intelligence priorities. No one wanted to put in writing that Japanese and German scientists were working on aerosolized delivery systems in Manchuria while the bombs were falling on Tokyo, the source said. Admitting it meant explaining why we didn't stop them. What little is known about Silberregen's origin suggests that its development may have begun in 1943, with German interest in overcoming weather limitations for chemical warfare and Japanese interest in strategic delivery over wide areas. A 1944 Japanese Army technical bulletin refers obliquely to raindrop release trials conducted in a continental climate zone with the assistance of foreign consultants. No surviving document confirms that operational deployment was ever achieved. Today, the tunnel complex near Hylar is sealed under a thick layer of rock and overgrowth. Local oral history speaks of a ghost train that vanished into the hill as the Soviets closed in, leaving behind an acrid smell that lingered for days. Residents still avoid drinking from certain wells in the area, claiming the water has an unnatural metallic taste. The official OSS file on Asset 91L ends abruptly with a notation dated September 2, 1945. Termination, cargo unrecovered, site compromised by hostile control. No further reconnaissance warranted. Below it, in a different hand, appears a final remark. If Silberregen was complete, pray it remains buried. On February 17, 1943, during the rapid Axis withdrawal from southern Tunisia, a detachment of the German Brandenburg Division initiated Operation Sandviper. According to captured Wehrmacht field orders later catalogued by British intelligence, MI5 Ref HXR 2161D, the stated mission was the destruction of Allied fuel depots and rail choke points along the Gafsa-Garbes line. Yet appended to the orders was an unusual addendum marked Nur für den Kommandanten, for the commander's eyes only. It contained a single line. Theta ist Priorität. Extraction ohne Verlust. Allied intercepts from the period recorded Sandviper as a small-scale sabotage action, but witness statements gathered from local Tunisians after the war suggest a far stranger objective. Several residents of Gafsa described seeing a reinforced steel crate, approximately 3 meters long, being hauled from the site of a German-guarded archaeological dig south of the city. The crate was winched onto a 6-wheeled Seat KF 7 half-track, escorted by men wearing tropical uniforms but with insignia not typical of the Afrika Korps. Black collar tabs bearing a silver key emblem, identifying them as Brandenburgers from the Abwehr's sabotage units. MI5's North Africa Field Detachment, which arrived in the region days later, noted in its after-action report that Object Theta was logged not under recovered enemy material, but in a separate British War Office file as a cultural asset of potential strategic value. The same week, the US Army's G2 intelligence section in Algiers created its own entry for Theta, categorizing it instead as advanced materials, handling restrictions apply. On February 20, 1943, a Luftwaffe Ju-52 transport aircraft departed from a temporary airstrip near Sfax, allegedly carrying Theta to Naples for onward movement into occupied Europe. Allied ultra-intercepts confirmed that the aircraft never arrived. Its last reported position was over the Tyrrhenian Sea, in deteriorating weather. The Luftwaffe's transport loss log for that date lists the aircraft simply as missing, non-combat. A fragmentary Italian naval signal, intercepted 2 days later by HMS Kelvin, complicates the account. It reports explosions at sea in grid 54O, debris of German origin, with an attached note that the debris included sections of steel framework with internal insulation. No Allied recovery effort was recorded, though American naval intelligence noted that the reported grid was inside an area under Axis coastal watch, making retrieval dangerous. Decades later, a declassified 1946 British Colonial Office memorandum surfaced in the National Archives, revealing that the original dig site where Theta was discovered lay adjacent to a cluster of Roman-era ruins, and that the excavation had been initiated not by civilian archaeologists, but under the auspices of the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, in late 1942. Why an intelligence branch would direct archaeological work in a war zone remains unexplained, though internal RSHA correspondence from Berlin mentions recovering prior Reich property. In 1961, a retired US Navy officer, Commander Paul Delaney, claimed in an oral history interview that his post-war duty in Italy included cataloguing strange German containers brought in by fishing crews along the Tyrrhenian coast. One container, according to Delaney, bore a faded stenciling of the Greek letter Theta. The Navy allegedly took possession, and Delaney never saw it again. Historians have debated whether Theta was a prototype component, an artifact repurposed for weapons research, or even a container for documents too sensitive to transmit by radio. A minority theory suggests that it was a specialized alloy structure, possibly part of an experimental radar-absorbing project. Supporting this, a 1943 Luftwaffe engineering requisition from Naples requested test articles, composition unknown, as per Hart's sample, implying Theta may have shared origin with experimental materials recovered from Germany's mountain laboratories. No conclusive evidence of Theta's nature has emerged. The last entry in the MI5 file is dated March 3, 1943. All traces lost. Probable total loss at sea. No salvage authorized. A single pencil annotation beneath reads, "Not to be found. Better this way." The Gafsa dig site has since been reclaimed by the desert. Local shepherds still tell of the year the Germans came for the stones, and of the night after they left, when a dust storm rose suddenly from a clear sky, lasting until dawn. Whether that night's events are coincidence or memory refracted through decades of rumor, the trail of Projekt Theta ends with the storm, and with an absence in the records that no archive has yet filled. In July 1954, an unmarked parcel arrived at the French Foreign Ministry's Quai d'Orsay post room. Inside was a section of brittle microfilm and a single typed page bearing no signature or return address. The microfilm contained grainy black and white photographs of what appeared to be a complete V-2 rocket assembly platform. Intact, overgrown, and surrounded by dense jungle. On the gantry structure, partially obscured by vines, were faded markings of the Waffen-SS Ahnenerbe Institute. The page accompanying the film gave only geographic coordinates, 2°13S, 60°44 placing the site deep within the Brazilian Amazon, hundreds of kilometers from any known wartime Axis operation. No Allied post-war report listed such a facility. Within days, the French passed the material to MI6 under an intelligence-sharing agreement. The British initiated a discreet inquiry, dispatching 2 field officers under diplomatic cover to Brazil in September 1954. Their mission report, Declassified, in 1998, describes a difficult journey upriver from Manaus with hired local guides. After 6 days, they reached the coordinates, only to find the area abandoned, the structures partially collapsed. Yet embedded within the concrete pad were rusted hold-down clamps identical to those used at Peenemunde's launch stands. Scattered, nearby, were fragments of wiring looms stamped with Bosch manufacturing codes dated 1944. The most perplexing discovery came from interviews with members of the Tucano tribe in a village downstream. Elder witnesses spoke of iron thunder in the sky during the dry seasons of 1946 and 1947, and of men in black uniforms arriving by riverboat, speaking a language that was neither Portuguese nor Spanish. They claim these men brought crates marked with a broken cross symbol and left abruptly after a period of smoke without fire rising from the jungle. MI6's internal follow-up connected the site to a long-standing but unproven post-war rumor that elements of the SS technical branch and selected Ahnenerbe researchers had escaped Europe via rat lines to South America, continuing experimental work under the protection of sympathetic networks. A 1946 OSS memorandum had warned of possible V-weapon component relocation to the Southern Hemisphere, but the theory was dismissed as implausible at the time. By 1955, the Brazilian Air Force had declared the coordinates a restricted zone, citing geological instability and hazard to navigation. British diplomatic cables show repeated requests for access were denied. In 1962, a Brazilian army patrol reportedly suffered casualties after entering the area. The official account blames equipment failure and tropical disease, though no autopsy reports survive. The origin of the microfilm remains unresolved. French records note no sign of tampering with the parcel, suggesting it came from within South America rather than Europe. The negatives were analysed by the Royal Aircraft Establishment, which concluded they were taken with a German Leica the 3C camera and on Agfa film stock, last manufactured in early 1945. One frame depicts a partially assembled rocket stage, bearing serial numbers not found in any Peenemunde production log. Satellite imagery in the early 1970s revealed only thick canopy where the site once stood. Later ground surveys, conducted unofficially by amateur researchers, found the concrete pad broken and overgrown, with no trace of the gantry. Yet fragments of high-grade steel, corroded but intact, were recovered and tested in 1981 by a metallurgical lab in São Paulo, which noted an anomalous manganese composition consistent with late-war German aerospace alloys. The last British file entry on the case, dated November 14, 1974, concludes, given the elapsed time, jungle overgrowth, and political constraints, further investigation is not recommended. Possible relevance to post-war V-weapon migration is inconclusive, close matter. A handwritten postscript in the margin reads, "Closure for convenience, not for truth." To this day, no definitive proof has surfaced to explain how an SS-marked rocket facility came to be in the Brazilian interior, or whether any launches ever took place there after 1945. The locals' accounts of Iron Thunder remain an unsettling echo. One that, if true, suggests the war's shadow may have reached far deeper into the post-war years than official history admits. Some secrets do not fade with time. They calcify, waiting for the wrong hands to break them open. What was hidden in those final hours of war was not meant to survive the peace, and yet, somewhere, it breathes still. We may never touch it, but its shadow moves beside us, a reminder that the past is never truly past, and some ghosts refuse their graves.